In this workshop, I'm going to show you how to make a crepe paper coral charm peony, and this is one of my favorites, whether it be from my garden or made from crepe paper. You can see here with just a few colors of crepe paper, you can make a big visual splash with these beautiful blooms. So let's get started. For the materials, we'll be using 4 different types of crepe paper. I have 2 folds of the honeysuckle, which is a heavy crepe paper, and 1 fold of the heavy in nectarine. For the leaves and sepals, we'll be using this double-sided, which is ferns and moss. And then to wrap the stems, I have the extra fine in juniper. If you're making more of these Coral Supreme peonies, you can also use different colors of crepe paper. You could use the blush or the pink hibiscus or even the coral. We'll be using the 24 gauge paper covered wire for the leaves, and then we have 6 of these stem wires. Here's a bag of the 6mm spun balls and 3 large 30mm spun balls. These will be used for the centers of the flowers, and then these are for the buds. The template is color coded so that you can know exactly which color for each shape. For tools, you'll need craft scissors, detail scissors, wire cutters, a fringe clip. I like to use these needle nose tweezers, curling tool, and then I have my white glue, which is the Barely Art glue, and my Sure Bonder hot glue gun, which has the fine point. For these flowers, I'll be adding a little bit of color, so there's a couple options. I have this little paint pan of watercolor paints, and it comes with a brush, and this is what I'll be using in the video. I also have a larger brush just to add color quicker onto the paper, or you can also use some markers. And I would suggest this is the 126 and the 743 Tombos. They have the beautiful brush tip, and you can find that in your materials list. Since I'll be using the watercolor, I also have a little bit of water and a paper towel. The first thing that I do when I'm making my paper flowers is I'll cut out all of the pieces of my crepe paper. And if you'll look at the notes on your template, even if you use a cutting machine, it's good to print this out and have all the details of exactly how many pieces you need. And you can also use it to, check and see which petal you might be using, because they're very similar size, so I don't want you to get confused. Something to note that's really important when you're working with crepe paper is to note the grain lines. You'll want to make sure that your paper is aligned with its actual grain line to the grain line on the template. This is also really important with these leaves. I know someone might have a tendency just to turn it so it goes straight up and down, but that's not going to work for our final leaf, and you'll see why in a bit. All of this crepe paper, you can cut it out by hand, and I like using both of the scissors, the craft scissors and the detail scissors. I like to use them back and forth depending on exactly what I'm cutting. You can cut crepe paper on a cutting machine that has a rotary blade, and if you're going to do this and you've never tried it before, I have a whole little section in the printed tutorial that gives you all of my tips and tricks. Here's my complete flower. I have 2 buds and 1 large bloom, and then my leaves. And I like to stack all of the pieces, the like pieces, together. It makes it a lot easier to work. And now that I have all of my pieces cut, we're going to start by making the center of the flower. Inside the center of the peony are these little seed pods, and we have 6 of them. And inside of the seed pod, just kind of poking its head out, are these tiny little petals. And they are in a pink, but they're a bit of a darker pink than the petals themselves. So rather than, having a huge sheet of crepe paper, what I decided to do is take a piece of my honeysuckle paper. I just cut a little strip and I've stretched it out all the way. So there's absolutely no stretch left. Then I'm going to get my paintbrush pretty wet, and I'm going to use the red. Just add some water onto that little pan. Start activating that paint. I also like to use this side pan here as sort of my area that I kind of mix my colors. It's really easy to wash off because it's metal. Kind of get a consistency that I like. I do want quite a bit of saturation here. And I am using a larger brush. This one's just pretty small. Then I'll go ahead and just add some color right onto this crepe paper, and it's going to get pretty soaked, and that's why I want to do this first, because we're going to give it a few minutes to dry while we make our stamen. You don't need to go all the way to the top. You can just kind of paint the one edge because these pieces are pretty tiny, and if you want to, you can flip it over and add some more color to the back. And this will just give these little tiny center petals a bit more of a pop. You can set that somewhere to dry. I would take it up off the mat, and I like to set it up so that it has full access on both sides to the air. All right, wash my brush out. We're going to use more of the watercolor. Just kind of clean up my space. Okay, setting that all aside. That's my little tiny template. Now we are going to move this over because I'm going to need all the space. And I have this long strip here, and this is what we're going to make our stamens from. But the first thing we're going to do, of course, is stretch it. We're going to stretch it pretty much as much as you can. Just get all of the crepe out of there. I'll show you a close-up of what that looks like once I've stretched it. You can see there's not much left. Then, because it's so long, I actually like to cut it into thirds. It's easier to manage. It doesn't have to be an exact third, just pretty much a third. And cut it along the grain line, nice and straight. Then I'm going to take one edge and just fold over the top. And this is about, here, we'll do a measurement here. This would be between 1/8, yeah, I would say about 1/8 and 1/8 and a half. 1/8 or 1/4, right between there. Just fold that over, make it fairly even. And you're folding it against the grain, but since it's stretched out, it's pretty easy. And I'll do that to all three pieces. What is it called? AMSR, ASMR. Then I'll be using my white glue. We'll open that back up just a bit. Actually, you can probably, let me use this hand. You can probably just slide it right under the point underneath and put, make sure my glue's coming out, and then just put a thin line of glue right underneath that fold. And once it's under, you can press it down. And you'll do that to all three strips. Use my other hand. Ambidextrous. But now you can't see where I'm putting it. So I'll see if I can turn it around on the next one. You don't need a lot of glue for this, just a nice thin line so that it keeps it folded onto itself. I'll fold it back so that I can see where I'm putting the line. Notice that my glue line is a nice steady stream. There's no dots, there's no gaps except for right there. If you do have a gap, just fill it in, because we're going to be cutting this into little teeny tiny stamen, and they'll be so thin that if you miss a line, it might pop up. So go back and fill in any of those gaps. And if it does pop up, that's okay. You can just cut it off. And we'll go ahead and seal that down. I find it works really well just to pick it up like this. rather than trying to press against the table. If a little bit of glue comes out, that's okay. It's really not going to show. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, just to add an extra touch of color, take my watercolor here, and this time I'm going to use orange. And with a really light touch, I'm just going to tap the very top edge just to give a bit of a color shift. And again, you could do this with a marker, but I think this works really well. Set that to dry. I like to keep this paper towel right here with me because it's an easy way to clean my brush before I go on to another color. We're still waiting for that to dry. Make sure it stays up. There we go. So we'll go ahead and continue with these. I'm going to take each strip and fold it in half and then fold it in half again, and I'll make sure that they're nice and even on the folded side. Then I'll take my clip, and I would say that's about maybe a little less than 1/4 of an inch. I'll measure it here for you. So that's about 1/4 of an inch inside of that clip. Then I'll take my small detail scissors, and I love using these scissors for fringing. It just makes it so much easier. I'll start on each end and just open up those folds. And then I'll go in and cut all the layers at once. And you'll want to make this fairly thin, but not so thin that you're going to cut it into shreds. And I'm taking my time. Since I'm cutting 4 layers, I'm just taking my time to make them nice and even. And you know, you might ask, why did I bother folding over the top edge? And the reason I think it looks better is it adds a bit of bulk to the top so that it looks like there might be some pollen on the tips of these stamen. It's just that tiny detail added touch. And it's nice to cut 4 layers at a time because it does go a lot faster. Because we still have 2 more. Okay, so that one's done. I'll do the other 2. If once in a while a few pieces fall out, don't worry about it. We have quite a bit of fringe. I'm not fringe ninja-ing today. The fringe clip is actually a newer addition to our techniques. We used to cut all of this by hand just by holding it, and then we figured out using a clip just makes it so much easier. It keeps everything in place, and it's easier to hold. And also it gives you a guide to actually clip towards. And you'll notice that I'm not clipping all the way to the metal. I'm leaving, I'd say about 1/8 of an inch between my last cut and the actual clip itself. And it might vary. It might get a little wider here and there, and in the end it will all work out. I also try to make each of the fringes just one cut. So rather than going snip and then slide and snip, I try to just have my scissors positioned so that I can get the whole thing in one cut. Sometimes I have to nudge it up a bit, but it works pretty well. Okay, the ends might be a bit off, and that's okay. We'll just cut those off. All right, so now we're going to open it up. I am going to just go ahead and trim off the edges if it doesn't look as even. And then I like to wet my fingers here. You can use, the water from your watercolors. And then I'm using my fingers, rolling these between my fingers. And now that I say this, I actually figured out a tip yesterday. It works really well to start with the very, very tips of the fringe. And this is where it's going to be stiffer because we do have 2 layers there. So just rolling that first, and then you can go back and kind of give it a roll towards the base. And I found that when I started to do this, they didn't tangle quite as badly. I mean, that looks pretty good. But I just figured this out yesterday. And you can see as I'm twisting the lower part how the tops just look nice and thick. And nice and thick in a good way, so it looks like there's a bit more pollen on the tips. So there's the first one, and I'll do that to the other 2. Sometimes if you fold them before they're quite dry, they stick a little bit. So yeah, you might want to just let them dry a bit more. And you can see here why it's important to have a really steady line of glue. Because we cut these so thin that if you missed a spot, one of these little folds might flop up. Okay, those are ready to go. In the past, I might have used my curling tool to give these a shape, but I found that when I did that, it actually pulled out some of that twist. So I'm going to show you a different technique on this flower. All right, those are ready to go. The next thing we'll do is we have 3 pieces of this 24 gauge wire, and I'm going to cut the 3 pieces into 3. So since it is a 12-inch wire, I'll cut them at 4 inches. Doesn't have to be exact. They're not exact. All right, this is dry, and I need 6 of these little tiny pieces. So I don't cut this piece on the cutting machine because they're so tiny. It's easier to cut with scissors. I'm going to fold it in half, and then a third, and a third, so that I have 6 layers. You can see everything's flat on that end. And then I'll place the template on top. It's the same color, so it's kind of hard to see. And then just using my detail scissors, just cut around. And there's 6 little pieces. And I'll take my white glue and add a bead of glue just at the base. A small dot, you don't need a whole lot. And place my wire right in the center, and then I'll fold it over so that it sandwiches the wire. Then what I'll do is take that point that is pointing upwards and just squish it with my finger. If you want to do this now, or you can wait until it's all assembled, you can pull this little flower a bit more open. This is a new version of this, and I really like the way it looks. It's so subtle, as it needs to be. And I'm just making sure that it's all connected to the wire at the base. And if you put, just enough glue, you don't want too much. I'll show you exactly how much. So I'm just putting a small bead from edge to edge. That much glue will soak through the paper enough so that it will not only glue it together like this, but when you press it down, it also holds that into place. Okay, those are ready. I have my 3 extra pieces of wire. Now I'm going to slide these little balls onto the wires. I really like these natural spun paper balls. These are the teeny tiny 6mm, but they have a hole that goes all the way through. So if you're not using this brand, you might not have the hole all the way through. Take your needle nose tweezers and go ahead and make that happen, and just get the hole to go from one side to the other, because we actually will be stringing them onto our wires. And it's really quite easy. And the holes are big enough that you can actually push it right onto the edge and overlap the crepe paper. Then add some glue. And I found that adding it to the back, the bottom side, worked much better, because I actually am going to paint the top, and I don't want the glue on the top. You can see there's a little bit of a bubble of glue there, and that's just fine. I know it's going to hold. So I'll do that for all 6. All these details. By the time you slide the ball over the paper, the little pink paper, it actually holds fairly well, so you could just skip the glue. By the time we get it all assembled, I don't think they're going to move, but I'm adding it. It's an option. There was even a bubble for you. So you can set these aside and let them dry. And I'll take my juniper crepe paper. This is the extra fine crepe paper, and I can use these scissors to cut all the way through. You don't have to. You can open it up if you don't want to cut that much, but I'll go ahead and cut a strip right off the end. And this is going to be what I use to wrap all of my stems and also to hold things together. So this is about, let's see, about 3/8 of an inch. Close to a half, but closer to 3/8 of an inch. So I have my thick stem wire, And I'll gather all of these centers. And I'm going to pick which one is in the center. Doesn't really matter. But pick one and then surround the other 5 around it. There will be a bit of a gap. So you want your balls to all be at the same level. And you can see there's a bit of a gap on one side, and that's okay because we will rearrange them once we get them on the stem. There we go. The center can be a bit higher if you'd like. Takes a second. All right. Now I'll place that against my thick stem wire, and I'm using the pointed side. This is the thicker side and this is the pointed side. I'm going to add some white glue. You can see I'm going up onto the wires and then down onto the thick stem wire. Take my crepe paper. I'm starting at the thick stem wire because it's easier to grab onto, and I'm moving it up the wire just a bit to give that a nice tight fit. You can also adjust them here. If you see any that are lower than you'd like, you can just kind of gently pull them out, and you'll want to do this right now, otherwise the glue will dry really hard. There we go. Okay, so once that feels like it's nice and secure, I'll go ahead and cover the rest of these wires, which is about, what, 3-4 inches down. And as I'm wrapping the stems, I'm stretching the crepe with my fingers. So I'm kind of holding it with my back fingers and then using these 2 pincher fingers to tighten it and roll it as I go. And I like to add the glue onto the stem rather than the crepe paper. It seems to be cleaner and it's plenty. Okay, so there we go. There's our center. Now I'm going to bend them all out, give them some space because we need to paint them. So these are going to be green, but since I don't really love these greens, what I'm going to do is mix a bit of yellow. So I want quite a bit of pigment. I'll add some water, mix it around, and then I'll put it onto my little metal lid here. You can see how I'm kind of rolling the paint off. And if you're super picky about mixing your colors, you can go ahead and clean off your brush and then go into the yellow. As you can tell, I'm not super picky. Go ahead and grab some yellow. Start by getting it wet. You could actually add the water first and let it set for a few minutes and then come back. It does dry pretty fast though. So maybe like 30 seconds. All right, there's some yellow. And I do want quite a bit of yellow in there. So it's actually more of a yellow that's tinted green. That looks good. And I'll just go in and paint all of these little white balls so that they're green. The paper soaks it up really nicely and it will dry really quick. Whoop. You can see that I left about 1 inch of wire from the bottom of the ball to where I started wrapping the stem, and that's about right. You want it enough space so that you can pull these balls apart and add the color. Okay. And once you're done, it does dry fairly quickly. You can go ahead and pull these back into place, and that's where you can arrange it so they're spaced nice and evenly around that center. I see one little tiny spot that I missed. All right. And now we're ready for the stamen. So to add the stamen, I'll start on one end and just add a nice amount of glue, probably about 3 inches. And I'm placing I'm placing this right on top of the wires before I start the stem, because I want it to be fairly high up. If I made the stamen lower, these would stick up a bit too much. So we're going to be wrapping it over the wires. And as you wrap, you can stretch. It's fairly stretched out, but go ahead and stretch if you want to. And you'll want to stack the stamen right on top of each other. So you won't move down the stem, you'll just stack, stack, stack. I like to do it in about 2 or 3 inches at a time for the glue, adding glue 2 or 3 inches. And also you can kind of squeeze it together as you go so that it becomes nice and compact. I'm getting brave, I'm doing about 5 inches. It's really whatever you feel comfortable with. And once I have that done, I'll go ahead and kind of squeeze that base to make it nice and compact. Roll it between my fingers. You can tell it gets a bit squishy because the glue makes the crepe paper soft. And we'll just keep going with our second strip. And again, we're stacking. We're not moving it down the wire there. Here, I'm going to turn it this way just so you can see a bit more, better angle. It's kind of awkward. I'm doing it upside down. And even if I'm not pulling it as tight as I can, once I have it completely onto the center wire here, I'll use my fingers to compact it like this. Looks like a dandelion. Okay. And now we have the last one. It's not important that you have a clean, unbroken strip of glue when you do this, because you're adding so much glue that it seeps through the layers and it actually makes, you know, almost, I don't know, sculpted. It holds itself through multiple layers. So you can be a little less precise with your glue, as long as your ends are nice and tight, that last end there. You can also sort of push it up if you feel like you've come down a bit. You can flatten the base, and then I'm just kind of grabbing the whole thing and giving it a nice press with my fingers. So that's kind of bothering me, so I'll add a little glue to that flap and close it up. Okay, before I shape this, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. So I'll set it aside and we can start shaping the petals. And at this point, I will be changing to my hot glue gun, so I'll set that to turn on, grab some extra glue sticks. We're starting with the smallest of the petals. This is petal number 1, and there should be 10 pieces. You can see here. First thing I'm going to do is give it a curl. So I'll just give it a nice, soft, gentle curl on the petals. I'm using my curling tool, and you can see since it is a heavy crepe paper, I can just drag that right across the edge and use my thumb to kind of hold it against the plastic, and it will give it a nice shape. I find that if I don't curl first, it always has a bit of a boxier feel, so this is a really important step. All right, the next thing I'll do is take my thumb and my thumbnail and put it kind of, I would say about 1/4 inch from the top. Take my other thumbnail and I'm going to crush the edge. Just kind of crush it down towards, it's almost cupping my left thumbnail there. So it looks somewhat like that. And then I'll give it just a bit of a stretch to add a cup. One thing I noticed is since these are so thin that if I stretch it up here, it starts to curl. And the way that you can solve that is just give it a bit of a stretch at the base. You don't want too much of a stretch because you want these petals to be pretty small. So I'll show that to you again. All right, so I'll go ahead and crush the edge. Give a bit of a shape. Can you see that curl there? How it's kind of starting to rotate. So I'll just straighten it out by pulling that. And the thing about, when you're stretching your petals, I would always go less stretch to the when you start, and if you want to add more stretch you can, but once you stretch it out you can't take that away. So I kind of go less stretch, and then if I say, oh, you know what, I want more of a curl, then I can add that later. Can always go back in. So be very gentle with your stretches. I have to say this crushing the edge is kind of fun. And I like it that some are more than others and a little bit of variation. Okay, here's 10. Let's see how this is doing. That feels fairly dry. So what I'll do to start shaping these is I'm going to hold the base like this and then bring my fingers up and then just press down. And that's going to start making it a bit more arched. Then you can go in and use your fingers at the tips to kind of press them towards the center. That way I can shape it without pulling out the curl, the actual spiral that I created with my fingers earlier. And I think it just looks better. You can make sure those centers are showing. This is where the tweezers are a great little tool, because you can go in here and kind of release those little tiny stamen. Sometimes they get tangled. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, so that is ready for petals. I'm going to add all of the petals with hot glue because, you could use the white glue if you wanted to, but you might be sitting here a long time holding the crepe paper until it dries. And these are a bit heavier than an extra fine or a double-sided crepe paper, so that's why I do like the hot glue. And then I'm going to bend the stem right now because we have cameras at a couple different angles, and I want to keep this close down to the table so you can see it. So that's why I'll unbend it when we're done. So for these petals, I'll just add about, 3/4 of an inch of glue. And then I'm going to place them right on the edge. I'll start right here at the base. I could probably add a bit of less glue. I would say maybe closer to half an inch, because I don't necessarily want to glue it onto the stamen themselves. And now in the past, I've talked a lot about kind of doing a triangle, working in a triangle, and I'll do that for the first 3 petals, but I'm going to throw a curveball. We're going to do it a little different this time. So I have kind of a basic triangle with these first 3 petals, and rather than filling in between, I'm actually going to start stacking the petals. So I'll go, I'm stacking barely right here to my left, maybe your right. You can see that it's very slight how I'm stacking it, but they're not totally stacked one right on top of the other. And I'll do that to all 3 here. I do like to try and go in the same rotation, so if you're going left, keep going left, or if you're going right, just go the same way. It just looks better. If you mess it up, no big deal, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so I have 3 stacked with 2. I'm going to do another one with 3. And then the last 3 petals, I'm just going to kind of vary them depending on where I feel like it. I'll put one here, so it's kind of random. You can see just sort of halfway between those 2. That one's slightly stacked, but not quite as much. And then I'll put my last petal here. What I found when working with these, the peonies that have so many petals on them, when you do a fairly even rotation, your eye starts to get blurry and there's no rhythm because there's so many petals that you don't know where to look. So I found that having a bit more of a rhythm where things are stacked a bit tighter gives your eye a movement around the flower and it looks a bit more realistic. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, petal number 2. We actually have, let's count them, we have 14 of these. Okay, we don't have to count them, there's 14 here. And we're going to do the same thing where we'll give them a curl. This one will curl the back just a little bit, not too much. So we'll curl one direction, flip it over, and just a quick slight curl back so it has almost an S shape, like that. And not a lot of curl, just very, very lightly, just so it's not straight. I usually do like 1, 2, and then flip 3, or 1, 2, 3, flip 1. Just remember to flip it. Okay, I'm going to pull out 7. So I have 2 piles of 7, and I'll do the same thing that I did to the small petals, where I'll use my thumb and crush the edge to 7 of the petals. And then I'm going to give it just a bit of a stretch. Again, if you don't overstretch, you can always go back and add more. But you can't take the stretch away once you do it. about a 1/2 inch of glue, and then I'll start kind of doing the same thing where I'm going to stack. So I have 7 petals. I'll do 3 stacks of 2, and then I'll have a random petal. So I'm going to go across over here to the other side. I'm also kind of stacking on the smaller petals as well, just playing off of that. The last petal, I think I'll put it over here. All right. So for these, I'll just give it a bit of a stretch. I find that if I stretch the top a bit more so that it has a cup, since I'm not crushing it, that looks really good. Otherwise, the petals tend to look a bit flat. So I give more stretch to the very, very top, and then whatever I need to do to make sure the petal doesn't twist too much. I don't mind a bit of a twist, just not a lot. You don't want it to flip over. That's probably too much of a twist. So I'll just kind of work it out. Just for fun, I'm going to add a bit of just a little tiny wrinkle on a few of those. Okay, and we'll keep layering. And as we add more petals, all of these big gaps will be gone. So it will look like a full flower. Every once in a while, just throw one in randomly, like, there's a gap there, let's throw that in. For this flower, I have a large, we're making 2 large and 1 of a medium size. And the only difference is the medium will not have the largest petals. They only have petal 1, 2, and 3, but they won't have any petal 4. I think, you know, when you're doing an arrangement, to have a varied size of flowers looks really good. You don't want them all to look the same, and it's easier for the eye to see different sizes. Okay, so there's all of petal 2, and you can see it's starting to look really nice. You know, you could stop there. You could make an even smaller version if you'd like. But for my medium, I'm going to go ahead and add the next 14 petals. And we'll do the same thing where I'll do a curl this direction and 1 slight the other way. An easy way to tell between the sizes of the petals is the height. So they just go down in size. So if you're confused on, wait a second, is this because they're about the same size here, but they're just longer. So that's an easy way to tell the difference. And we'll do the same thing with the stretch, where we just add more stretch to the top and then just flatten out the petal. The same with the others. If you want to throw a crushed top edge once in a while, that gives it some variety. I love that. Okay. When I'm adding petals, I find it works really well to kind of flip it back and forth, look at the front, and then turn it over and, glue from the back. But if it works best for you just to look at the face all the time, that's okay too. It gets a little cumbersome at this point because there's so many petals. It gets kind of floppy. If you don't put your glue on quick enough, it will cool. Okay, there's where I want to go. When I'm doing this by myself, when I'm not on camera, I actually hold the stem in my mouth like this and just work on the back side. I'm not recommending it, but that's what I do. Actually, I do recommend it. So I'm just adding to these little stacks, and then I'm making, kind of random placements. Like here's a random placement, and then starting a stack off of that. And I think it is a good idea. I'm going to turn it over and look at it here in a second. It's best to kind of check your work as you go, because you might surprise yourself and be like, oh, that's looking nice. Look at that. Like you could stop there if you wanted to. But you can see how adding the pattern of the petals, and then it breaks, and then pattern breaks, kind of helps the eye move through the flower, and it doesn't look like just this mass of petals. This is a new version for me. Okay, let's do it here. You can see I'm stacking all the petals pretty much at the same spot. I'm not moving down the stem. Okay, one more petal. So if you were stopping at the medium size, this is where you would stop, and you would go ahead and add your sepals. But we're going to make a larger, so we have more petals. For the last set, this is 12 petals, and they are a bit longer. Okay, we'll do the same thing. You can see I have some tape on this one. This is how I keep my crepe paper on my mat so it doesn't wrinkle up as I tape the edge. And that's all in your notes. You can read about it. Should I take the shiny tape off my fingers? I don't want a lot of curl on these petals. I want them to be fairly flat. And I want them to kind of float away from the flower. And I do like a little extra curl on this side because this will help them float away from the center. You can see that, ooh, right there. So very slight, just so it's not a flat petal. Okay. And as tempting as it is to evenly place these petals, I just think it looks better to cluster them. So there's a cluster of 3, and then I'll start another in this section. The reason why I'm not adding glue up this petal more than an inch is I do really want them to float. I don't want them to be so glued against the base. I want them to really have the space to float like that. I'm going to check it out. I like the way it looks. I see I'm going to put one there just to not have quite such a large gap. And then one over here. To break up this line here, I'll add a petal kind of right in the middle, so it's floating underneath, to break that up. And then my very last petal, I'm going to leave this gap, it's just interesting. I think I'll put the last petal over here. All right, so there is the large version. You can see it just got bigger. It looks like it's starting to drop some petals, which is, you know, that full-blown, beautiful garden peony. And if you wanted to go in there and add any extra shape, you could do that at this point. But right now, we're going to turn it over. I'm going to straighten out the stem, and we'll go ahead and put some sepal on the back, some sepals. So for the larger flowers, the large and the medium, I am using 5 of these sepals. They're all the same shape. I'll take my curling tool, give them kind of that same S shape. And that is 5. Okay. And then when it curves up towards me, I'll place that, you know, facing upward, and then place my thumbs in the middle and give it a nice stretch. I'll give it a stretch a bit down into the point. Go ahead and do that on all of them. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Have glue strings. I'll add some glue to the tip, and then I'm going to place them barely touching the stem, but curling down around towards the flower. And 5 should completely cover the center. You can add a bit of extra glue if you want to. If it feels more secure, you can add just a bit more glue. I'm overlapping these sepals just a bit. But not too much, because you do want all 5 to cover. So it looks something like this. Try to pull off all my glue strings. All right, now, before we wrap the stem, I do want to add 1 leaf, or actually 2 leaves. So I'll go ahead and pull my leaves over here. And I'm matching them up. Let's see, I only need 2 right now. So I'm matching them up so that 1/2 of the leaf looks like this, where it has this double point, and the other half has a single point. Then I'll take some wire. I'll take 1 piece of wire and cut it in half, so it's 6 inches. Actually, I think I'm done with this. And I'm going to run a bead of glue right on the edge. And I'm pretty close to the edge here. Place my wire on top, and I'm not placing the wire all the way to the tip. I'm leaving about 1 inch of the tip. Add just a bit more glue on top of that wire so that it seals really nicely. And then sandwich that wire between the 2 pieces of crepe paper. Once I have it in place, I like to pick it up and, kind of squeeze it between my fingers and really seal the edge. I like the edge to not have any gaps, but it's nice and tight. You can do it on one side, flip it over, make sure the other side's nice and sealed. Since I want 2 leaves for the large, I did 2 leaves for the large, 1 for the medium and 1 for each bud. Yep. You have no idea how hard this is to make a flat line. Do you like my technique of moving my crepe? This is another reason why I really love this glue, is this very, very fine point. You can see the metal tip, which gives me just enough glue. And it also holds so well. Ugh, okay. can go in and clean up your tip if you need to, if it didn't quite come out at a perfect point. That looks pretty good. And these I did cut on the cutting machine, so there's a few little jigs there. Okay, so I'm going to place one leaf straight up against the stem, but the other one I want to have a bit of a stem. So I'll take my crepe paper and just wrap about 2 inches. I'll start it right there at the base of where the leaves kind of split off. And this gives me an opportunity to kind of tighten that base. And then I'll just bring this down the stem. And like I said, I'm stretching as I wrap, so it's nice and clean. And then to shape these leaves, I'll just pull it through the curling tool, give the leaf a little kickback. These tips you can curl just a bit, and then since the wire is in that part of the leaf, you can just move that. So I'll start my crepe paper. I'm going to start it a bit lower and then go up and then come back down again. It just makes it easier to get it started. So I'll start it underneath. Whoop. I'll move it up towards the top, and then that way I can catch those little points from the sepals. Make sure I have enough glue and make a really nice clean finish, and then I'll bring it back down the stem. So I don't want the leaves too far down the stem. I'll go ahead and place my first leaf, and I'm placing it so that that extra little bit is going to be wrapped right into that crepe paper. So that way I'm wrapping not just the wire, but the end of the crepe paper. That will hold it much more secure. I'll show you here. Can you see that? So I wrapped it right up to the top there. All right. And then I'm moving down, I would say about 1.5 inches, and I'm placing the other leaf, but I'm leaving some of the actual stem that I've already wrapped so that it can kind of move away from the center there, just to give it some variety. And I'll go ahead and finish wrapping the stem. I'm stretching as I turn it so that it gets a nice smooth finish. If it's easier for you, you can also stretch beforehand and then just wrap it. That works too. And there we go. You can move the leaves around. I'd probably wait until this is dry before you move them, but you can move them around so that they peek out when you look at your flower. And there's the large bloom. So we have 2 large and a medium, and now we need to make 2 more buds. To make our peony buds, we have these oval shaped petals, and then we have some sepals. We're starting though with this large 30mm ball, and I'm going to go ahead and glue that onto my thick stem wire. So this is only 30 millimeters, and oftentimes these peony buds are quite large, so I wanted to show you a trick on making yours a bit larger. All of my scraps that I had from cutting, the crepe paper petals, there was an edge on the bottom, and I would just take those, and just like I would for the stem wrap, I'll just cut it in a strip. And it's about 1/2 inch wide, maybe a little less. Then I'm going to take this ball and kind of cover it with glue. You don't have to, use your finger and rub it around. You can just kind of spread it with the tip, just enough. And this is what I call my mummy wrap, and this is what I will use on any sort of small, buds for other flowers, but this is a bulkier version. So I'll go ahead and start that at the base. And I have to stretch it out just a bit to get it to stay because those super creped areas don't like to stick quite as well. Now, my first couple rounds, I stretched the crepe paper completely when I wrapped it around, and I noticed it's going to take a lot longer. So on this round, I'm not going to stretch it quite as much because that will make it bulky faster. So I'll wrap it over the top, over to one side, and then I'll come back around and almost make an X. You have to stretch it a bit just to keep it on. And then I'll wrap it to the other side, wrap it around, bring it up. So I'm wrapping it like a mummy. And once you don't have any more glue, you can see I'm pressing the base up because I'm not necessarily pulling it up super tight. And once I'm out of glue, looks like I have one more bit here. I'll just add some more glue. So I'm just bulking this up. None of this will show. You could probably use anything, but I did have quite a bit of this crepe paper left, so this made sense to me. It helps to stretch because it actually does kind of curl around, but I'm leaving as much as I can so that I don't have to use quite as many wraps to make it bulky. You can see I was practicing some watercolor there, trying out some colors. I'll go ahead and start another strip. And you can see it's getting larger. Let's do one more. We'll do one more wrap and we'll call it. All right, I'll go ahead and add lots of glue. Maybe on this round I'll pull it tighter just to smooth it out a bit. Okay. I find that it works the best if I always wrap it over the top and not, don't get too sideways in this direction and that direction. But if you kind of keep it consistently over the top, it seems to look a lot cleaner. And of course, it's more even. I'm feeling like a bit more glue here. Of course, there's other ways you can create, you can create some sort of ball with tin foil or paper, but I thought this was kind of a fun way to do it. That way you can have different sizes. And it's all paper. I love that. Oops, should go this direction. Works best to wrap around the stem, so I'll go the other direction here. And then I'll finish over on this side. Okay, let's compare it here. Yeah, so that's noticeably larger, and I like having one that's just a bit bigger. All right, for the next step, I'm going to take these little oval shapes and stretch out the center as much as possible. So I'm going to make the biggest cup possible. And you can see that's like 100% stretch right there in the center. So there's no stretch left. And then I'm sort of blending it out to the edge and trying to not stretch the edge at all. So I'll give you a view here so you can see how it's completely creped around the edge, but in the center it's completely stretched to get the most deep cup possible. I'll start with this one first. So I'll go ahead and put some glue onto the top, and this will be its little top hat. And we'll cover the paper so that none of it peeks through. You can really give it more stretch here and kind of smooth it out. The next petal, I'll put the glue inside the petal. I have about halfway from the base to the center. I don't need to worry about getting the petal all the way down to the wire, but instead I'm looking at the top of the ball. I'll show you here. And I'm wanting this petal to almost reach the center. And then I'll press the base, kind of stretch it out and kind of move it around until it's nice and smooth. And I'll continue kind of rotating these petals around. And whoops, there. Before I go too far, I'm actually going to pull the first petal back. I'll pull it back about halfway, and you'll see why here in a second. And you'll notice when you look at a peony bulb or a peony bud, it's really quite smooth. Like the petals are fairly compact against the center, so there's not any of them peeking out or kind of pulling away from the center. They're pretty flat. So as I'm placing these on, I'm trying to smooth them out as best I can. And again, just kind of layering and rotating and then keeping that top fairly smooth. And we can always add a bit more glue. Okay, so there's 4 petals, and it looks like I'm going to do 5 in the rotation plus the 1, so 6 petals for this bud. And you can see I have my first petal pulled back. That way I can tuck the last one underneath, and then I'll pull the first one over the top. Now I'm going to go in, add a bit more glue under the center, these little center flaps, and just really press them in so they're nice and flat. Again, a really great reason to have this glue, because you have that nice point to get the glue into those small areas. I'm just going to press it into my hand. And there, that looks really nice. Then I'm going to take 3 of my sepals, and I've already shaped them and cupped them as deep as I can. Add glue about halfway up, just like the others. And then I will place the tip overlapping the stem just a little bit and smooth that out around the edge. So it really doesn't matter which color. The green has a variation of 2 colors, slight variation. One side's darker than the other, and I kind of like mixing them, so don't really worry about which color is on the outside and which color is on the inside. Just having that variation makes it look really pretty. You can see how I do have that tip coming over onto the wire, and I'm just kind of pressing and sculpting it into place. And then the third one should fit really nicely so that they don't have any gaps between and completely cover the base. And that's why you don't need to worry about the white ball showing through down here, because we just covered it. And there's our bud. There's our smaller bud. So let's go ahead and do the same thing to the larger. Since I already have quite a bit of crepe paper on this one, I'm not going to lay the top one over the top like I did the first, but I'll start just wrapping them. And once I have the first one on, I will go ahead and peel back. Let's see, which side do I want here? We'll peel back this side. I like gluing it and then peeling it back because then it already has glue on it and then it seals down really nicely. I don't have to re-glue it. Now since this is a bigger bud, you know, it's not going quite as close to the base, and that's okay. You can just really stretch those because we don't need quite as much coverage. My last two here. I may only need one though. Let's see. No, let's go ahead and add both. Okay, there's my last, and then I'll slide this one over the top. And the same thing, I'll add a bit more glue into the ends there. It takes just a bit longer to get that glue into the crevices when you haven't stretched the crepe paper, and since the edges are not stretched, that's why you just have to work it a bit more. And I like just holding it in my hand tightly, just using my other hand to get it pressed. Okay, now we'll add these. Since this is a larger bud, I may need another sepal. We'll see if we can get it with 3. We'll see if that works. And for this one, I don't need it to go quite as far to the top. It can be peeking through a bit more. So if you bring it down on the stem, it should probably cover with all 3. I think that should work. Yes, because then the wider parts will overlap easier. I like having a little split right there too, so you can see a bit more pink. Okay, I have my leaves prepped and ready, and I just need this crepe paper strip here. Let's find a good end. And since these buds are fairly, you know, they're small compared to the flowers, I do want to put the leaf fairly close to the top. So I'll wrap the base of the bud, I would say about an inch and a half, and then I'll place my leaf right against, and again I'm going to cover the end of that. I want to cover this whole base of the leaf so that it sits really nice and tight and it has a nice transition. And then I'll go ahead and finish covering my stem. These stems are probably longer than you would find with most peony flowers, fresh peony flowers, so you can cut them down. I tend to keep them long and bend them rather than cut them. That way, if I'm making a really large arrangement and need longer stems, I can just unbend them. But if you're giving them as a gift or you want them to look nice and tidy, I might cut them shorter. I always like to add a bit more glue where the transition of the leaf comes onto the stem. You just want that to be really secure. And this glue and the crepe paper wrap is extremely solid. It does not come apart. Okay, there's the bud. I like to kind of tip the head away from the leaf and maybe move the leaf around a bit. I don't think the buds would be standing straight up, so that's a good way to finish those. So here we have 2 of the large blooms, a medium, and 3 buds. And just these 5 stems look beautiful as an arrangement, and I think this would make a perfect gift. If you enjoyed this workshop and want to make more crepe paper flowers, come find us at liagriffith.com, or you can buy tools, supplies, and kits at feltpaperscissors.com.